Do we have too much government?
We need to put people ahead of corporate profits.
This system is so lopsided.
This threat is a real threat to democracy.
And I think that's really important. That's something we haven't been doing in this country for a long time.
Where do you start? What do you do? How do you do it?
Access to Democracy and other Eagan community television programming is supported by Thomson Reuters, makers of Westlaw Next and based in Eagan. Through Westlaw Next and other innovative online services, Thomson Reuters is the world's leading source of intelligent information for businesses and professionals. Online at thomsonreuters.com. And by U.S. Federal Credit Union, the member-owned financial institution offering service, value, and experience you can trust to the greater Twin Cities community.
Welcome. Access to Democracy returns with two guests who I have been looking forward to having you folks meet for a very long time. And I would say this, if you ask 10 people who the most famous couple in Minnesota is, I guarantee you at least 8 of them would say Sam and Sylvia Kaplan. And welcome Sam and Sylvia Kaplan.
You're very kind, and it's our great privilege to be with you. We know what this program has been over the years.
Well, thank you. Sam is an attorney. Sylvia, who holds 2 master's degrees, I didn't know that until I was doing some research about this program, are a formidable couple. They're involved in so many civic and charitable endeavors, but also political. They certainly were the backbone of Paul Wellstone's campaign. Barack Obama, in both campaigns, really relied heavily on them. And Sam was appointed ambassador to Morocco, where he served for 3.5 years. Certainly unusual in several respects. Number one, there have been very few Jewish ambassadors to Arab countries, and I think that's probably the most interesting place for us to start.
Well, I think it was unusual, but it was welcomed by the people of Morocco. They were, I believe, flattered that the President of the United States thought it appropriate to send a Jewish couple to Morocco, a country of 34 million people that has about 99% Muslim population.
And a good friend of the United States also.
A good friend of the United States. And Alan, when you go to Morocco, you'll be asked again and again the same question. Which was the first country to recognize the independence of the United States after we signed the Declaration of Independence?
And it was Morocco.
Morocco. Most people would say France, but it was really Morocco.
Again, I didn't know that until I started doing some research for our interview. And you people are a most unusual couple. You're married, what, 38 years now?
39.
39 years now. And you are still a hand-holding, loving couple. You breakfast together every morning where you sit and talk about the news of the day, and it's just most unusual.
And we host other people at breakfast often.
Do you?
Oh, yes, because when I owned the New French Cafe, and that was the place to go for breakfast in Minneapolis, the whole world could come. Now we usually have breakfast at the Minneapolis Club, so we invite people, but we often have guests.
And you flatter us a little bit when you talk about our engaged in conversation over the news. Frequently we read silently when we're alone.
We divide up the newspaper and we each have our sections.
Yeah, Sharon and I do the same thing. And then she comes in and takes the variety section from me because she can do Sudoku and the crossword puzzles, and I don't even challenge myself in that regard. But and there's a give and take there. You discuss issues. You generally come out with a family opinion on certain issues.
We almost always agree, particularly on political candidates, which is important. I couldn't imagine being married to somebody who voted for somebody I wasn't voting for. It would not go over very well.
Sometimes it takes a little longer for Sylvia to persuade me, but she always persuades me.
Yeah, we have the same situation. It's interesting that we have that in common, and
But it was, it was very important to be an engaged couple when we were in Morocco, because I thought often that if you were there with somebody you didn't enjoy spending time with, you would not have anybody that you could really trust completely, and you have a lot of downtime even though you're busy in social. There is, like on weekends, we were often alone for the whole weekend. And he, because he had a heavy security team, and we didn't want to have them leave their families unless there was an important event going on. We wouldn't just call them because we wanted to go out and have coffee. We were, stuck there behind the, the gates of the residence.
yeah, that's one of the things I wanted to talk about, because I know that King Mohammed VI, I believe his name is, was very insistent that you have a surplus of security. And apparently every place you traveled, there was a 3-car cavalcade. You had about 10 security men.
We had 10 very large bodyguards who became like family for us, and they were all appointed by the king. We had diplomatic security officers supplied by our own embassy and by Washington, but our primary security was the people provided by the king.
They were Moroccans. Mustafa was the head of our security detail, and we called him our George Clooney, and he just kind of took care of everything for us. And so we miss him and our butler Kamel a lot.
And of course, our grandchildren came and fell in love with the bodyguards.
Of course, of course. And it's good that they got over there, and I had an opportunity to see you, quote, in action. But it had to be very different from where you would just walk out here to the streets of Minneapolis, and here, every place you went, you had to go with you couldn't just go down to the corner for a cup of coffee.
And he missed when he came back. And you step out of the door and the car isn't waiting for you. You have to Google directions. You have to find your own parking place. You have to get gas. That was the adjustment. It wasn't going, it was coming home.
See, there was an important difference between the treatment of the ambassador and the treatment of the ambassador's wife. When we were together, we were treated exactly equally when it came to security. But during the day, if I was out alone, I had the security and she did not. So she had a much greater range of freedom than I did.
And you utilized that in some degree to meet Moroccan women, if I
met Moroccan women, but Morocco is actually a very safe country. People, particularly after the outbreak in 2011, the Arab Spring, people thought that we were under, a siege, and we never were in Morocco. I always felt completely safe wherever I went. Yeah. It just wasn't dangerous.
Do you think
there's an architectural quirk in the houses of Morocco whereby in the middle of the room like this, there will be a small step for no logical reason. And I tell people that my bodyguards were there a small percentage of the time to be sure I wasn't shot by somebody, but most of the time to prevent my falling down those steps.
Do you think you'll ever go back as tourists?
Yes, we'll go back, and for a specific reason. First of all, our embassy there was truly dysfunctional. We had 450 people jammed into buildings that really could not accommodate them. And we started building a new embassy while we were there, very large one, costing $200 million, and it will open at the end of this year, and then, of course, we'll go back.
Well, that's got to be exciting.
That will be exciting.
And that's
but
really...
mostly, they think it's a good idea for former ambassadors not to, sort of step and get in the way of the newly appointed ambassador. Of course, there's nobody there right now because while Obama has appointed a new ambassador, it's his confirmation is being held up in the Senate like a lot of other
Why,
confirmations.
why should his confirmation be different than every other confirmation?
Right, exactly.
We have a very dysfunctional government in this country at the time. We talk about it a lot on this show. We have a president who had some really, really grandiose plans, and he's been stifled.
Sabotaged.
Sabotage is even a better word.
That's
Every
not the
place-
diplomatic word.
Well,
So he was appointed the diplomat, and somebody asked me very recently that I saw a local figure here in the Twin Cities who everybody knows very well, and she said to me, well, how did you manage to be nice for 3.5 years? And I said to her, I did, because in Morocco is an Arab and a Muslim country, and it is a culture where people are extremely agreeable by their nature. So if they don't know how to do something and you ask them to do it, they won't say, nah, I can't do that. They'll agree, and then it won't get done. So it's a different culture than we have here in Minnesota, where people tend to be straightforward and tell you what they can do and what they can't do.
yeah, you betcha.
Yep.
And I say that as a transplanted New Yorker.
I'd just say one further word about the destruction, the damage, if you will, to the diplomatic process to have so many ambassadors who've been voted out of committee in the Senate and have not been confirmed by the Senate itself. I have great respect for the careerists who serve and fill in while waiting for the new ambassador, but the country of Morocco and every other country wants to have an ambassador of the United States.
And it's an insult for them not to have a confirmed ambassador. The thing that troubles me is it's not the qualifications of these people, but it is a mindset that comes out of Fox News and Roger Ailes and Rush Limbaugh that keeps this country really held back. It's a mindset that belongs to the Tea Party that would rather destroy than create, and I just can't fathom it. I mean, I was involved in politics for many years in New York. I was a party leader, and with my Republican adversaries, we still sought to do what was best for our area, for New York.
That was the old days. You know, during the last presidential election, we often spoke to colleges, to students, and other groups, people in Morocco who followed our election so closely. They knew all of the details, and we had to tell them again and again that politics doesn't have to be like this, particularly during the Republican primary, which were so ugly. We talked about Paul Wellstone and the joy of politics and how it could be different.
But Alan, this is not just confined to the diplomatic corps. One of the most highly qualified people I know is Andy Luger, who's been nominated to be U.S. Attorney here, confirmed by or voted out by the committee. They haven't yet voted at the Senate level. It makes no sense.
None of it makes sense. To me, none of it makes sense, because if you're going to be an obstructionist, have a reason, not just because there's a black man in office and we're going to do everything we can to stifle that man no matter what. I mean, Mitch
But-
McConnell said it the day after the election. I want to make him a first-term president, and I mean a one-term president, and we're going to fight every
Well,
piece
it's
of litigation.
It's not just the Moroccans. The rest of the diplomatic world also doesn't understand what's going on, and so we have to, and you begin to see yourself as a citizen of the world, and you see how everyone else is looking at the way the United States is behaving, and I wish that the people there could see that.
And it harms our reputation. Education-wise, we are falling in our statistics because we don't have that compelling desire to be really the best educated country. Health-wise, the fact that we don't have single payer
Wow.
as the only industrialized country that doesn't have it is beyond my comprehension. I guess maybe I'm too old for this now. I don't know. But I still feel that we can attain greatness, and we've lost a lot of the greatness that we had.
And yet, the view of the world out there in Morocco and elsewhere about America is complicated but interesting. It is a world that sees America as having many things that are troubling to it, like the entry into Iraq and the entry into Afghanistan. But they're very strong about America as an institution that is a foundation stone for guiding the world. I mean, they care a lot about what America does.
During the last election, they all told us that they should get to vote for the president also. They were, by the way, all very pleased that Barack Obama was the winner.
I'm sure that they were, and
I-
either time, as a matter of
Either
fact.
time. So it
Yes.
was, so when we first got there, you know, everybody, you remember we got there late in '09, in the fall of '09, and Barack Obama had recently made his Cairo speech. So Barack Obama there were such high expectations in the Arab and the Muslim world that and by the time we left, a lot of the young people now like, well, he didn't do what he said he was going to do, therefore he's as bad as Bush. They would say things like that.
And they
So-
don't understand that his hands have been tied from the very simplest things that he's tried to do to some of the more, ambitious projects that he had.
Yeah, they would always ask about Guantanamo. There was we would speak at various organizations and institutions, and there would be canned questions that they had all written out before we even started our speeches.
I just happened to hear a speech by Harry Truman, I guess when he was running for the election, he wasn't supposed to win against Tom Dewey, and they called him Give Him Hell Harry for a reason. And I remarked to Sharon at the time that I wish that a little bit of that energy was in Obama. I wish that he was not quite as laid back as he is. Don't be the professor. Get down there.
I'm reading the new biography of Teddy Roosevelt, and I keep thinking that Obama should be more like Teddy, but that's, but we'll...
But remember, that was still a period in our history where we believed that foreign policy was something that was controlled by the executive branch, that the president was the chief executive to set that foreign policy, and yet you see the kind of thing being said in Washington now that makes it far more combative than it ever was before.
In those days, we respected the president, and we certainly have seen more than one incident over these years where we've disrespected the president, where individuals have disrespected the president, and that's really troublesome to me.
We've been living in a kingdom for 3.5 years, and you realize how wonderful democracies are where you actually have the privilege to disrespect the president, because when you're in a kingdom, everything is very controlled, and it's a
That is
different
It's a
world.
constitutional monarchy.
No,
right?
they call themselves a constitutional
But they're
monarchy.
not?
But a more appropriate term is that they are a monarchy with a constitution,
Oh, okay.
so that the basic powers still rest with the monarch. But this is a complicated thing. In that part of the world, that form of government may work more effectively than our form of democracy, because there's a tradition of being guided by what happened in the 6th century when the Prophet Muhammad was born, and the king is deemed to be a direct descendant of the Prophet. And his words are words that guide the country, even though they have a parliament, prime minister, they have good elections. There is still the fact that it is the king who's the commander of the faithful, as he calls them, therefore is the leader of the church.
He's really an absolute monarch. He is head of the armed forces, he's head of everything comes from the palace.
So I say that it is a monarchy with democratic qualities, and I think that's a much better way of saying it than
seems-
a constitutional monarchy.
Seems to work for them.
It seems to,
I
and
know.
think about that. All the problems in Syria, Egypt, Iraq, Tunisia,
Afghanistan.
Libya, Afghanistan, that part of the world is aflame, and this part of the world called Morocco is calm and stable.
When we got there, I thought that I would find the artists and then the intellectuals and the troublemakers, and I would visit with those people and they would say, down with His Majesty, but they don't. because they understand how important stability is. They think that His Majesty Mohammed VI is a kind man. He cares about the poor. He cares about his people. It's, even though, the palace and the royal family controls the majority of the businesses and the economics of the country, people don't complain about that. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah, I've always wanted to visit Morocco, and we've spent a lot of time in Europe, but I have not gotten there yet, and it is still intriguing to me.
It is an intriguing country. It is a country that has changed under the current king, different from his father in personality, in style, and in the commitments to whether they'll play on the world stage or they will play a more internal kind of governmental operation.
I know
But,
one of you came back, and I don't know which one of you it was, says, we came back with a greater appreciation of America.
Well, you can't help but
You
come back
cannot- you
with
cannot help it,
I
but-
think wherever you live in the world, you understand. We came back in the first place, immediately got involved in the mayoral election and in various galas and fundraisers for all kinds of good causes.
Did
and
your
you
candidate
realize-
win in the mayoral
Never
election?
mind, but what you realize, the point is, though, that we do not have the kinds of, people are not devoting their energies to the community in the same way that they do in America.
Yeah.
People don't give their time and their money to fundraisers for good causes. They figure the palace will take care of that. They just don't. They might give a little
Yeah.
money to the mosque so that the next life they'll be taken care of.
The other
But
thing about it,
philanthropy
Alan,
is important.
your anger at what's happening in Washington derives from the fact that you know what's going on in Washington. As frustrated as you may be, it is a transparent process in this country. That kind of transparency is not found in other parts of the world, at least not with the same frequency.
Particularly in an Arab world, it's a very different kind of thing. You talk about how Morocco has changed, and you referred to my interest in culinary things. Food in Morocco never changes. They have no commitment to bringing their cuisine, their cooking traditions into the 21st century. They think the way they did it a century or 2 centuries ago is just fine. And I think that sort of represents the way they think about the world in general. Change is very fraught with problems for them. It might get worse rather than better. It might not happen. Why would you possibly do something different? So they just try to do things the same.
And my guess would be that not everybody in Morocco is walking around with a cell phone and tweeting. I don't know if that's
No.
so
Social
or
media
not.
is pretty big,
Social
actually.
media is
It's
big,
fascinating.
but its biggest challenge, of course, is to grow its middle class. It has a very successful elite, and it has an impoverished lower class, and growing that middle class will strengthen the country, but it is slow in coming because of the frustrations they've had in building their school system.
But even in the rural areas where the education suffers and the kids, they still have access to the internet. So that's been very interesting to us to see that. I remember when Hillary Clinton sent her envoy for innovation, who was tweeting before I sort of knew what tweeting was, and and Hillary Clinton figured that out, that this is how you reach the younger people and the alternative worlds in that part of the world. And during all of these revolutions, these were so important, particularly for women who, the issue is, do women have a role, and what's that role going to be? It's safer to be a radical and a revolutionary when you're doing it, when you don't actually have to be present.
I think that same question about do women have a role exists in this country with a lot of right-wing mindsets also. It's, I grew up in a time with Jacob Javits as my Republican senator, and there would be no place for him
would be
in
no
the
place for
Republican Party today.
Not
and
at
I
all.
find it hard to adjust to the fact that there are people who don't necessarily have a program, and their only aim is to stop somebody else from their program. I mean, it's, to me, senseless.
Yeah, the response to the State of the Union sort of was another indication of
It certainly
how it
was.
continues to happen.
As they were sitting on their hands.
Let me tell you a program you should really be proud of, the Peace Corps. The second largest contingent of Peace Corps is in Morocco. And they are so wonderful in terms of how they operate in the country. And I mention that in the context of this part of the conversation because they were our informants. They went out in the rural areas, they talked to the people, and they told us how the people
Well,
really felt.
they spoke the language. They were embedded in these very small communities where obviously they wouldn't be in a community where there wasn't a lot of poverty. And then they would come back, and before they left after their 2-year stint, we would always debrief them and find out things we wouldn't find out anywhere
It's really
else.
interesting because there's so many areas of Africa that are in chaos right now, and yet you have the stability in.
You have the stability, and you started out the conversation speaking about the fact that we were Jewish. It is significant that Morocco is the only viable Jewish community in the Arab world. To be sure, it's small. It's only 4,000, but it is very viable.
There are Jews in South Africa, but that's been an issue also.
Yeah, it,
You know,
it's been
besides
an issue
the-
in many places.
In the role that women play in the Peace Corps, of course, is very significant, but we also got to know a lot more about the American military operation. And some of the women generals who became our friends were very, very impressive. And
You know, when we went into Libya, we being NATO, the lead flight was headed by Major General Margaret Woodward. The fact that it was a woman has not been discussed very much, but I thought it was very significant.
I think it's significant, and I think it's significant in terms of where women are today, as they should be. It's a question of equality, even though we don't pay them equally.
well, also in the, I always tell people when government leaders and others came and were touring Morocco, and they would meet with the Moroccan government people, and they would meet with academics, and I would tell them, meet with the business leaders. Those are the people who really know what goes on. The head of Coca-Cola in Morocco was a woman. And businesses are just, and years ago in the 60s when I was a civil rights activist in Golden Valley where I lived at the time, and I went to General Mills because nobody else would listen to me. The businesses are always ahead of everybody else because they have to be.
We should have scheduled you for an hour, because we haven't even scratched the surface of some of the many things I wanted to talk to you about. Wellstone, your political activities, your charitable activities, the many things that you're both involved in, and we have used up our half hour already.
This is how it goes.
Well, we will come back next time. We won't get lost trying to find our way here.
We're very easy to find. I really thank you so much. This is so meaningful to us. We've wanted to have you here for a long time, and I really thank you both for coming in.
Thank you very much.